This photo, taken just days after she was rescued, appears to be one of a fair-haired girl with no worries, but the story behind the image reveals a much darker truth. On November the 23rd, 1961, 11-year-old Terry Jo Dupereau was found drifting alone in the vast expanse of the Atlantic Ocean, clinging to a small cork float, sunburned, dehydrated, and barely alive. Her survival was a miracle. The story behind it, however, was one of unimaginable horror. Just days earlier, Terry Jo and her family had set out from Florida on what was meant to be a dream vacation. Her father, an eye doctor from Wisconsin, had chartered a sailboat named the Bluebell, captained by Julian Harvey, a former Air Force pilot with a dark past. But that dream voyage turned nightmarish on November 12th, when Terry Jo awoke to screams and the sound of running on deck. In the chaos that followed, she discovered that her family had been murdered, slain by Harvey in an apparent insurance fraud scheme involving his own wife, who had also mysteriously died aboard. Terry Jo was the sole witness to the crime. To cover his tracks, Harvey scuttled the boat and left her to die. But incredibly, she found and climbed onto a small flotation device, surviving nearly 4 days alone at sea with no food, water, or protection from the elements. When she was finally spotted by a Greek freighter, her eyes were swollen shut, her lips blistered, and her body near collapse. Yet she had survived, becoming one of the youngest known sole survivors of a maritime mass murder. Julian Harvey, meanwhile, had already been rescued and spun a false story about a sudden storm. But when word reached him that Terry Jo had survived, he checked into a motel and took his own life, leaving behind a suicide note that confirmed her account. Terry Jo Dupereau's story became a symbol of resilience in the face of evil, and she later went on to quietly live her life, even authoring a memoir titled Alone, Orphaned on the Ocean. This deeply disturbing image, taken during the Russian famine of 1921 to 1922, captures an almost unimaginable truth. Peasants posing beside cannibalized human remains. The full photo, often censored or cropped due to its graphic nature, was taken in or near Buzuluk, a region devastated by starvation, disease, and social collapse. It remains one of the most haunting visual testaments to what happens when a society is pushed beyond the brink of survival. The famine struck in the aftermath of the Russian Revolution, compounded by the Russian Civil War, the collapse of agricultural systems, and a rigid policy known as war communism, under which the Bolshevik government forcibly requisitioned grain and supplies from rural peasants to feed the cities and Red Army. As a result, entire villages were left with nothing to eat, not even the grain they had harvested with their own hands. As food vanished and infrastructure failed, rural families turned first to grass, tree bark, and vermin. But in the famine's cruelest stages, even those desperate measures failed. In some regions, famine-induced madness led to cannibalism, both of the recently deceased and, in some horrifying cases, the murdered. Soviet police records and foreign relief workers confirmed these events, though the Soviet government often suppressed or downplayed them for ideological reasons. The photo was documented by Western aid workers and humanitarian groups like the American Relief Administration and Quaker Missions, who were horrified by what they encountered. One Quaker visitor described an orphanage in Buzuluk, overflowing with dying children, their bodies covered in lice, too weak to cry. In the mornings, staff would separate the living from the dead, stacking the corpses in sheds to await daily pickup by the dead cart. An estimated 5 million people perished in the famine. It was one of the worst humanitarian crises of the 20th century, yet remains overshadowed by the political revolutions and wars that caused it. This image depicts what is known as a sansa, a ceremonial shrunken head prepared by the Shuar, Achuar, and other indigenous peoples of the Amazon rainforest in Ecuador and Peru. While the practice has often been sensationalized by outsiders, its roots lie in deeply spiritual traditions involving the balance of life, death, and supernatural power. According to traditional Shuar belief, each person possesses two spiritual energies: the Arutam, a guiding soul of strength and courage, and the Muisak, a vengeful spirit released upon a violent death. When an enemy was killed in battle, the Shuar believed that their Muisak could return to seek revenge. To prevent this, they would shrink the enemy's head, trapping the spirit within and neutralizing its power. This act wasn't simply about trophies. It was a form of spiritual warfare and protection. The process was both ritualistic and precise. The skin and hair were carefully removed from the skull, which was discarded. The remaining flesh was boiled, treated with hot stones and sand, and molded into a smaller, leathery version of the original head. The eyes and lips were sewn shut, not out of decoration, but to symbolically seal the senses, preventing the spirit from seeing, speaking, or feeding after death. Shuar leader Jefferson Acacho explains that sansas were not made solely from enemies. Sometimes, the head of a revered leader would be preserved this way as a form of honor and remembrance, a symbolic way of keeping their spiritual essence close to the tribe. However, this practice was exploited during the 19th and early 20th centuries, when Western collectors and museums created a demand for sansas. Some were produced specifically for sale, often inauthentic or made from non-human materials, muddying the cultural narrative. Many real sansas ended up in university collections and museum displays, often stripped of their context and reduced to curiosities. In recent years, institutions such as Oxford University have begun removing these items from public view and repatriating them out of respect for the cultures they were taken from. This stark photograph from Texas in 1914 shows four proud hunters standing beside an early automobile, its sides draped in dozens of dead quail, so many, in fact, that their bodies nearly obscure the entire vehicle. The men hold rifles, their expressions matter of fact, unaware that this image would later become an exhibit in a cautionary tale about the consequences of unregulated hunting. At the time, the photo might have been viewed as a symbol of sporting prowess or abundance. But within a few short years, it was reinterpreted as evidence of ecological recklessness, a vivid warning of how quickly man can disrupt nature's delicate balance. Quail, it turned out, weren't just game birds. They were part of a natural defense system against one of Texas's most destructive agricultural pests, the cotton boll weevil. This insect devastated cotton yields, and quail were known to feed heavily on boll weevil larvae, helping keep populations in check. But as this photo demonstrates, they were also killed in such numbers that they could no longer serve that role. As noted in the Volta Review, 1914, the aftermath was severe. As soon as the quail were thinned out, the cotton boll weevil crossed over the line, and a loss of $25 million per year began on the cotton crop. This single hunting party may not have caused the crisis, but it exemplified a broader problem: unchecked sport hunting with no regard for long-term ecological consequences. The resulting agricultural collapse served as a grim wake-up call, not just for farmers, but for lawmakers and conservationists across the country. The photo was later used in lectures on wildlife preservation, showing that the destruction of a species, even a small one, could ripple outward to devastate entire ecosystems and economies. Amid the winding paths and leafy corridors of Père Lachaise Cemetery in Paris stands a solemn and powerful figure, a monument to the victims of the Buchenwald-Dora concentration camps, unveiled in 1964. Sculpted by Louis Boncel, himself a former member of the French Resistance, the statue is both stark and poetic, a gaunt, angular form cast in stone, reaching skyward in a mixture of agony, dignity, and remembrance. Commissioned by the Association des Déportés de Buchenwald-Dora, the memorial was not simply meant to mourn the dead, but to confront the living, a reminder of the horrors of Nazi brutality and of the French men and women who perished far from home. Buchenwald and its subcamp Dora were sites of unimaginable cruelty, where thousands died from forced labor, starvation, and systematic execution. At the base of the sculpture is an excerpt from a poem by Louis Aragon, a French poet, resistance fighter, and voice of humanist defiance. Translated into English, the inscription reads, "Let this forever show how the man had to fall, and how courage and devotion maintain his name of man." These lines encapsulate the heart of the monument, that even in the depths of dehumanization, human dignity endured. The memorial serves not only as a tribute to those who died, but as a testament to resistance, resilience, and the fragile, persistent identity of humanity in the face of horror. Père Lachaise, founded in the early 19th century, is no stranger to grief or greatness. It is the final resting place of artists, revolutionaries, and cultural icons such as Oscar Wilde, Frédéric Chopin, Edith Piaf, and Jim Morrison. But among the grand tombs and mossy statues, Boncel's monument stands apart in its simplicity and weight. Surrounded by trees, birdsong, and the ever-turning wheel of time, the statue whispers not just of death, but of memory, resistance, and the enduring question of what it means to be human.